Mishna Yud, we were in the middle of where we spoke about Rabbi Yochanan's ben Zakkai's 5 students, and we said what they thought was the positive traits that they should have in each one believed in a different positive trait that was most important.
Mm-hmm.
Now, last week we discussed if you had a trait that you thought that you should do, which trait would you do? And each one gave a different example, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai claimed at the end that the most important one is to have a good heart. In other words, to try to focus on your emotions and because he said that if you have a good heart, you work on you'll start seeing the positive, you'll find good friends, you'll have good neighbors, you will also be able to see the outcomes of your actions. So he said that's all inclusive. Okay. Now today he goes on the opposite question he asked his students. He says, what happens if you had to choose something to avoid? So he says, what would you avoid? Now many of them just choose the opposite of the trait that they had said is the positive. Right? Stay away from that as much as you can. Okay, so he says, Suru, go out and see. Eizehi derech ra'a shitrachek mimena adam. What is the bad way that man should distance himself from? Okay, now remember Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is the man that we spoke about. We're going to actually have a whole quote from him at the end of this Mishnah. It's a long, long Mishnah. He says, Ayin Ra, he said that the best trait to have was a good eye. He says the worst trait to have is an evil eye. It means evil eye, he's saying that you kind of always see the bad in everything that you do or that you have. You see the bad in other people. That's what an evil eye is. What you see bad, you see evil when you walk around. So he said, he wants you to, when you walk, when you see, when you look, he wants you to see the good. So obviously, when you're talking about this trait, why is it so important? I think in today's day and age, this is possibly more important than any other time in history, where we have social media and all those type of things, and we get to see what everybody else's life, and everyone, of course, only puts the best of their life, and therefore it makes it feel like you have nothing, and makes people to be depressed, and leads to all other issues and depression and mental health issues that people have, and of course the issues of it's never enough, and journalism where journalists are all about not reporting the news, but they're all about saying what's wrong with everybody else, and that's how they sell. Now that's really to a certain degree the concept of an evil eye, which is a terrible way of looking at the world. A person could never be happy in that way. There's a brilliant example, I actually saw of this recently, of the analogy of the difference between when a fly flies into the room and the bee flies in the room. Have you heard this one?
No.
So when a fly flies in the room, it looks for anything that's smelly, that's going off, and that's bad, and attaches itself to them, and that's where he lays his eggs. That's where he puts his future. That's where he eats. On the other hand, the bee looks for anything that's good, and it disregards anything that's bad, and he only looks for the good, nice, beautiful, healthy flowers, and turns them into nectar and honey and beauty and sweetness. So obviously that's a choice that we could all be. We could all decide whether you're going to be a bee or a fly, and hopefully we all choose to be the bee that creates sweetness out of everything and sees beauty in everything.
That is a fascinating analogy. Can I take it a little deeper?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's very valid, fascinating. For the world to function correctly, both are needed. But
Right.
it doesn't have to be us that does both.
Exactly.
The flies are part of the rubbish removal.
Right.
Believe it. If I read a science paper, if there was someone waved a magic wand and got rid of all the Schotzenvermotze, all the worms and the insects that eat all this rubbish, if they suddenly vanished, the earth would be something like 6 to 20 meters deep in rubbish.
Yeah.
Because these little things that we detest turn out to be necessary mechanically for the earth to function properly.
Of course.
But the bee, aside from the flower and so on, the flowers, the honey, the bee, of course, pollinates the fruit tree, all the trees. If the bees were not
Right.
alive, we would have serious food production issues.
Right. And there you go. And they're able to, because they pollinate the fruit trees and all the other trees, which further spreads all the goodness.
So they're both necessary. The flies are not necessarily evil, but it's a job which maybe is not appropriate for Jewish people to do.
Not everything is, there's some people that have to be the scoundrels of earth, I suppose, in order to have a balance of good and evil within the world. But that shouldn't be our choice, right?
It's a fascinating analogy, and it raises lots of other questions.
Yeah, very, very interesting point. I like that point. Okay, let's go a bit further.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Rabbi Yeshua says an evil friend, and he also said that what he was most concerned about was, he said a positive trait was a good friend. So he says the same thing. Rabbi Yossi says an evil neighbor, because once again, he was worried about the type of community that you live in. And he's concerned of these very similar style. What's the difference between a friend and a neighbor? Obviously, Rabbi Yeshua is talking about one individual that you really connect to that person, while Rabbi Yossi is talking about the whole neighborhood being important.
Yep.
Rabbi Shimon is talking about, he says, Rabbi Shimon, when he said about positive traits, he said that somebody is haroya esanola, the one that sees that the outcome of his actions, right?
Yep.
Now over here he says something kind of strange. Now, Rabbi Shimon is not going to give like something generic. Even seeing the outcomes is very specific, right? Over here, he also says something even more specific. He says to borrow and not repay. It says that's the worst trait that you could think of, being mean to people, being, what's it got to do with the borrow and not to repay? And the truth is that it's a very general category. It's the same concept as the opposite of a person that doesn't see the outcome. He's saying this is just a symptom of somebody that sees, that thinks that they can take, and doesn't say that if you don't give back when you just receive, then you'll never get more. People only tend to give. Hey, David. People only tend to give more to people that they trust and the people that are willing to give back. But if somebody doesn't repay, that's the ultimate sign of a person that doesn't see the outcome of his actions, right?
I'll let you continue. I've got to go.
Hey, sorry. Go ahead. Did you say something? I didn't hear what you said.
I've got to go. There's a local request for assistance.
No worries.
Okay.
Okay. David. How are you? Everyone's busy today. I'm trying to unmute yourself.